Hello and welcome. The main objective of this course is to prepare you for a successful C1 certification. We're going to be preparing together for Cambridge's Advanced, which assesses the C1 level of the Common European Framework of Reference. So, let's begin from there. Let's see what the framework is. Now, the CEFR is just the guide for the design of language programs, textbooks, tests, and other language-related materials, and as such it describes in a very detailed way what learners need to learn in order to use the language for communication and the knowledge and the skills that they must develop to perform effectively. The framework answers two main questions. First of all, it tells you what knowledge, skills, and attitudes are necessary to become proficient in a language, and secondly, it defines and it describes the different levels of language proficiency. So let's begin from there. If you need to develop proficiency, or in other words, communicative competence, so what are the kinds of competences that you need to develop? You're probably familiar with the construct of communicative competence if you've taken math testing courses. So we can see that the construct of proficiency is very complex because it involves savoir, savoir-faire, savoir-être, savoir-apprendre, and also the different kinds of competences that you need to develop, such as linguistic, pragmatic, or strategic competence. And within each of these competences, there are other different complex abilities, such as phonological competence, or lexical, or grammatical, or functional, or discourse, or sociolinguistic, and so on and so forth. And you will see also that each of these competences has very detailed elements that need to be developed so that you can become proficient in the language. So basically, if we review these competencies, we will learn that phonological competence concerns the distinction and production of the sounds and the segmented patterns of the language to speak in an accurate and fluent way. On the other hand, lexical competence refers to the knowledge of the vocabulary related to different communicative situations, as well as the appropriate use of these words in a communicative situation, either orally or in writing. Grammatical competence is the knowledge of the morphosynthetic patterns that are necessary to express various communicative functions, and of course, it involves the accurate and appropriate use of these patterns either orally or in writing. Pragmatic competence is the ability that you have to function in an appropriate way according to the context and the interlocutor. That means that you make effective management of linguistic resources in order to achieve communicative intentions. Another very important element of communicative competence is discourse competence, and in this case, we are talking about the ability to produce the types of oral or written discourse corresponding to the level. That is, the communicative intentions, the rhetorical structures, and an appropriate register. This involves as well the mastery of the mechanisms for achieving cohesion and coherence in such discourse types. Of course, a final element of discourse competence are the appropriate strategies for comprehending and producing such discourse types. But that is not all. We also need intercultural competence. Now, being communicatively competent also involves the ability to understand behavior from the standpoint of the members of a culture, and to behave and talk in a way that will be understood by them in the intended way. In other words, it involves understanding all aspects of a culture, but particularly the social structure, the values and beliefs of the people, and the way things are assumed to be done and said. Finally, strategic competence, ladies and gentlemen, refers to the management of communication and learning. That is, all of those cognitive, metacognitive, and socio-affective ways that we use to plan, to execute, and to monitor, and finally to evaluate all of our linguistic behavior. We're constantly planning, we're constantly arranging, we're constantly monitoring, and we're constantly evaluating what we say to other people and what other people say to us. So, all of the previous competencies are the ones that are going to be evaluated in a proficiency test. But now let's turn to the second element of the framework, which corresponds to the levels of proficiency. The CEFR identifies 3 basic levels that can be subdivided into 6. First of all, we have A, which corresponds to the basic user, and it's divided into A1, which is the breakthrough level, and A2, which is called wastage. Now, the B level corresponds to the independent user, a person who can use the language independently. And in this case, the B1 level is called threshold, and the B2 level, the one that we are interested in, is called the vantage level. The final level, level C, corresponds to the proficient user, and in this case we have again 2 different levels, C1, which is called Effective Operational Proficiency, and finally C2, which is Mastery. We're going to go to the description of the B2 level because this is the one that we're interested in. So, what does it mean to have effective operational proficiency in English? Let's look at the different skills. First of all, for listening, you should be able to understand extended speech even when it's not clearly structured and when relationships are not only implied and not signaled explicitly. You should be able to understand television programs and movies without too much effort. When it comes to reading, you should be able to understand long and complex factual and literary texts, appreciating distinctions of style. You should also be able to understand specialized articles and longer technical instructions, even when they do not relate to your field. If we talk about the spoken interaction, in this regard, you should be able to express yourself fluently and spontaneously, without much obvious searching for expressions. You should also be able to use the language flexibly and effectively for social and professional purposes. Now, another additional thing is that you should be able to formulate ideas and opinions with precision and relate your contributions skillfully to those of other speakers. As for spoken production, in this case you should be able to present clear, detailed descriptions of complex subjects, integrating sub-themes, developing particular points, and rounding off with an appropriate conclusion. Finally, for writing, you should be able to express yourself in clear, well-structured text, expressing points of view at some length, and you should be able to write about complex subjects in a letter, an essay, or a report, underlining what you consider to be the salient issues. You can also select style that is appropriate to the reader in mind. Summarizing, effective operational proficiency is the level that a highly educated native speaker will have after completing a master's or a PhD. In other words, the person can handle a vast language repertoire, and he or she can use it purposefully and effectively to communicate in very informal and very formal contexts. So, the question that you all probably have right now is, how difficult is it to attain the C1 level? My answer is that it's not an easy task. Now, let's see what the theory says about your possibility of achieving a C1 level. If we see this table designed by the CENI, which shows the reference levels and the number of hours that you need to attain each level, we will see the number of hours that we have in Lengua Meta, and then we'll compare it to the levels that you should be able to attain with that number of hours. So, according to this estimation of the number of hours necessary to achieve a level, we can compare to the number of hours that you have in Lengua Meta. First of all, if you take your 5 Lengua Metas, you have over 100 hours, which will be enough to be in a C1-. And if we take into account your 5 Lengua Metas plus 8 content courses in English, you go over 1,000 hours. That means that you will have enough level to get the C2. And at the end of the program, you have completed so many hours that you go over the estimate number of hours calculated in the CENI. So that means that from this estimation, according to this table, when you graduate from the lay program, you should have, or you will be expected to have, over C2, which of course is not the case. This is theory, but real life is very different. Just to conclude with a very powerful example, let me show you the language level that 60 teachers had when we administered to them the BULATS test. 5 of the teachers in our school had A2 level, which corresponds to 9% of the 60 teachers in this sample. Now, 21 of them had a B1 level, which amounts to 35% of the 60 teachers that were tested. Now, only 27 of them achieved a B2, but out of these 27, only 23 were English teachers, the other 4 were French teachers. And finally, only 5 teachers, 3 of them were French teachers, 1 Spanish teachers, and only 1 English teacher had a C1 level. And finally, none of our English teachers had a C2 level in this sample. So, this example shows you that achieving a B2 level may seem easy in the description, may seem easy in the theory, but it is actually a quite difficult thing to do, and that's why you need to prepare for the test, and that's why you need to improve your level of proficiency. As a conclusion to this presentation, we can say that attaining a C1 level is a very difficult task, but it is achievable. What we intend to do in this course then will be to prepare you to the C1 level, first by showing you what the test measures, diagnosing your current level, and finally providing you with extensive practice of the skills you need to develop. Welcome to the course once again, and see you very soon.